Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jennifer Medina, and I am a member of CFED's State and Local Policy Team. And I'd like to welcome all of you to today's webinar, Housing as an Asset Building Platform, which is a reprise of a popular session that debuted at CFED's Assets Learning Conference in September of 2012. And it's backed by popular demand. In fact, we had over 800 people register for this webinar. So before starting, there are a couple housekeeping items. The first is that the webinar will be recorded, and we will be posting both on CFED's and NeighborWorks America's websites. All participants are muted, and this is to ensure sound quality. However, you can ask a question at any time by typing it into the text box of the GoToWebinar control panel. And we will be monitoring the questions throughout. We'll answer those that are straightforward in writing, and we'll share the rest after the presentations. If you have any technical issues, you can email gotomeeting@cfed.org, and our team will help you out. Today, we will be hearing from 4 leaders that have successfully integrated asset building strategies into housing programs. We'll first hear from Chris Krameyer, who is the President and CEO of Beyond Housing. And Chris is going to set the stage for today's discussion in his introduction of affordable housing as an asset building tool. Next, we'll hear from Marjorie Spinney, who is the former director of Cornerstone Corporation and who developed renter equity housing in order to create an opportunity for low-income renters to build assets and have a voice in managing affordable rental housing. Then Michael Mira, the executive director of the Tacoma Housing Authority, is going to talk about the role public housing authorities can play in building assets for their residents. And finally, we will hear from Rob Weiner, who is the Executive Director of the California Coalition for Rural Housing. And we'll be talking about how IDAs and the self-help model can be used together to help individuals build and acquire their own homes. So I'm going to turn it over now to Chris to introduce the concept of affordable housing as an asset building platform.
Thanks, Jennifer. Great to be on the panel, and great to be with Marjorie, Michael, and Rob as well to reprise our panel discussion from a while back. So there you see, that's our brand new logo that I personally love. I think it's great. So I hope you guys like it as well. Next slide, please. All right. So who are we? We operate in St. Louis, Missouri. We've been around for about 40 years. So our mission is to strengthen neighborhoods one family at a time, and our vision is to create communities where hope and opportunity make tomorrow better than today. We do work across the St. Louis region, but we also do some very specific place-based work, and we really believe in the notion that home matters, and how we create home is through this interlocking 3 circles here. Infrastructure, that's the physical space, so we build things, we rehab things, we manage things. We convene, we bring people together around common topics that are of importance to them in their community. We bring people around certain topics in our region to try to, again, solve some problems and look to align resources together. And lastly, we provide very direct life skills to those families that reach out to us day in and day out. Next slide. Quick snapshot of the organization. I won't read these numbers to you. You all can see them. The one figure of note relative to today's topic is that we do own 341 scattered site single-family homes that we rent to low-income families, typically single moms with kids. 31 more under construction, and we just opened up our first multi-family building, a 42-unit senior building. There's several traditional asset building programs that we also operate, from our traditional IDA mass savings program, where over the last decade or so, the families that we've served have generated over $1 million in mass savings. We do a community-based initiative called 24-1 that has been recognized by the White House, and this current school year we launched a universal savings program for a local school district where every incoming kindergartner had access to a $500 college savings account, and we had over 260 kids sign up. Next slide. All right, so when we think about building wealth, and when we think about the idea of asset accumulation. For us, it's really done through a variety of different ways, and I think from the beginning of this notion of asset building with Dr. Michael Sheridan's seminal work, Assets in the Poor, we really said, look, there's lots of ways that we can help families create assets and create wealth. There's not necessarily one only way to do it. So here in the St. Louis marketplace, we do it in a variety of different ways. Next slide. So a lot of us have heard and have seen that the face of the American dream is changing, with a number of folks not viewing homeownership absolutely as the end all and be all. But the reality is, for the folks that we serve, and a lot of people in our country, in the St. Louis region, housing is still the best way to develop wealth and to build wealth over time. So we'll talk a little bit now about how we do that with our affordable rental housing with services, our homeownership work, and the creation of a community land trust. Next slide. So the notion for us is we've been operating rental housing for over 35 years now in a scattered site single-family form. Is, look, at the end of the day, folks want a decent, safe place to live, and they have dreams and aspirations. And what we try to say is, let's use the house as the stabilizing point. Let's use that single-family home as a way to say, let's take a collected deep breath, and then let's really talk about the future. If homeownership is your dream, let's focus on that. If becoming a business owner is something that you're dreaming about, let's focus on that. If you and your kids have college in your aspirational dreams, let's really talk about that. So we start with that notion of let's figure out where you're at today and how we move forward, right? So certainly everybody who walks in the door, we have a credit report. We know where they're at. We know where they've been, and we'll develop a plan about how do we improve that credit score, how do we look at your budget, how do we get you back on the right track to where you need to be to have a strong credit profile that will allow you to get positioned for longitudinal success. The other thing it does, too, is it allows folks to say, look, now that I have some stability in my life because my housing is in better shape, now I can think about saving for the future. A lot of times the families we serve move on to a home ownership or can move on to market rate housing. Next slide. So a quick look at some of our match savings programs that we've done over the years. So certainly we're targeting a lot of families living in our rental homes, but some other folks who live in the greater St. Louis region, not in our rental portfolio. So you can see our IDA programs. There's 5 different things that folks have been saving for: education, home repair, home purchase, starting a business, and cars. So again, you can see how we've been able to work with the families we serve. Again, take this beginning point of being in our rental homes as a beginning point to think about what they want to do and what their future lies in front of them, and how do we help them work through this idea of managing your money, getting your finances together, and then again becoming a saver, and then getting to that asset purchase, and then ideally that asset accumulation. Next slide. We do traditional home ownership education and training, not only for those who live in our rental homes, but for the entire St. Louis region. So we certainly believe in this notion of catching the dream of home ownership and keeping the dream of home ownership. So we walk people through, again, kind of a traditional 8-hour classroom structure to really touch on all the pieces of what it takes to become a homeowner. So we're awfully excited about what we've been able to do over the years. In 2011, as you can see, we provide education to over 1,000 families, and actually went to closing with over 200 families, and provided a second mortgage to them relative to providing some public sector dollars. In 2012, our numbers were very similar to those. Again, the idea of positioning families for longitudinal success. We all know that excitement of getting to the closing table and how the real estate agent and the lender are very excited to get there because that's where they get paid. Our notion is, again, can we look at the longitudinal aspect of how do we help build your wealth and how do we help you look at not this purchase not as a transaction but as a transformational event in your life and in your family's life. And then lastly, we do foreclosure counseling as well. What we have found is very few of the families who go through our education need our foreclosure help, but lots of folks in the St. Louis region do. Next slide. And then lastly, we've recently created what's called the 24/1 Community Land Trust, and 24/1 is our place-based strategy in a defined geography here in St. Louis. 24 is the number of cities, small, tiny cities that are in the boundaries of one individual school district. It makes absolutely no sense, but that's the way we do things here in St. Louis. So what we try to do with this particular land trust was to say, again, how we use the traditional land trust model by, having the land be owned by a community, by the land trust, and have the improvement owned by the homeowner. Keep that equity in the community and help families living in those homes build their wealth. We've been able to secure the financing from a local foundation where we actually guarantee 1.5% equity appreciation every year. Now that's also the cap, but it's also a guaranteed appreciation. So what we're saying to families is, look, this is a great opportunity to work a fully rehabbed home in a community where there's lots of great work happening, and you're going to get a guaranteed return. And your guaranteed return says the land trust is going to buy your property back. So it's a great way to categorically know you're going to be building your wealth, and you're going to be, again, doing asset accumulation, because if you own your home in 3, 5, 10 years, that the land trust will purchase it back at a predetermined price. I think it's an innovative way to think about land trust. It is brand new. We've sold the first 7 houses. We have another 17 that are for sale. We're getting lots of traffic, lots of walkthroughs. I'm hoping here in the next 60 to 90 days that the rest of those 17 homes will be under contract and then sold. Next slide. So lastly, look, we believe in the idea that home matters, and that we know that we can start with housing and housing stability, but at the end of the day, there's much more to home than just that house. It's the life in and around the home that really positions that family, really fuels that family for their longitudinal success. We think affordable housing is still the most significant way that families are going to build wealth and build their assets. It creates a platform to achieve their family and their individual goals, and certainly creating wealth is one of those. And we think it also provides access to quality schools and services that can help build wealth and build that opportunity for the next generation.
Thank you very much, Chris.
You're welcome, Jennifer.
Great. So now we're going to turn it over to Marjorie Spinney to talk about the renter equity system.
Hi, I'm Jennifer. I'm grateful to be here and to have the opportunity to share this idea with people across the country. Renter equity is a way to connect affordable rental housing and asset building. We're bringing together community-based development, affordable housing, and a participatory management system, giving residents a greater voice in how their housing is operated and partnering with them to manage the housing so that it actually generates financial revenue that can be invested for their future. Next slide. This is a little background. The homeowners generally have over 30 times the net worth of renters. We've got a lot of people who need affordable rental housing, and it's growing. And if we don't do something about that, the wealth gap in this country is widening, and it will get wider. Next slide. We see a growing economic divide. If we look at homeownership, 80% of the households above median income and 75% of white American households own their own home. So we need to look at who doesn't own their own home. And we're talking about largely households who are below median income and may not be able to afford or cannot afford home ownership in a traditional sense, and African Americans and Hispanics who have very much lower rates of home ownership than others in this country. Next slide. This slide just gives the same statistics in a little different way. Next slide. And this shows that in Ohio, where I'm located, there 1.5 times as many white households are homeowners as black or people of color. So there's a significant difference, which I think indicates that there are obstacles to ownership. This slide lists some of them. Income is only one. Feeling insecure about employment, lack of ability to build the assets that would be needed to make a down payment or maintain a home, low or negative net worth. Many low-income people are in debt, or they have other obstacles and obligations, such as a family that they are trying to take care of on a very low income. Or they don't even have a connection or know anyone who has been an owner, so it's a very scary thing. Next slide. So what we've done with renter equity is try to create an alternative to traditional ownership that has many of the same advantages. I've listed on the left some of the advantages of owning a home. I think homeowners generally have a voice in decisions not only about how they take care of their home, but in their community. They receive tax benefits as an incentive to ownership. They have an opportunity to improve their home and add value, earning, hopefully, some equity or getting return of equity for that investment. They have the possibility to profit from sale of that house if prices are rising. And largely, homeownership is an individual responsibility. Renter equity offers some of these advantages. In terms of a voice in decisions, we have a participatory management system which really gives the residents a lot of control over the management decisions and policies that affect them directly, such as the house rules. They do not have the same tax benefits as a homeowner, but the tax incentives that are given to create affordable housing have made the rents more affordable than they would be. They do have the opportunity to build equity by contributing to the effort to improve the operating efficiency of their housing. And we'll talk about that in the next few slides. As a contrast to home ownership, which is largely individual responsibility, one of the advantages of renter equity is that it is a shared responsibility. So the residents themselves are not worrying entirely about how they are going to pay if their hot water heater breaks. They are partnered with a nonprofit owner that is planning to take care of the long-term maintenance needs of the property. What we're trying to do with renter equity as a background here is to make the residents producers rather than consumers of housing. So we're looking at a community-based approach where residents choose to do this, and we're not coming into a community and saying this is something you have to do, but we're giving them the opportunity to participate and have a different role. Next slide. I'm going to move a little quickly through these because of the time. A little background, though, is that we began organizing the first renter equity in community in 2000. It's really a management system, so we partnered with another housing developer, and basically they built the housing and we built the resident community that lives in the housing. We've done 3 of those in one neighborhood. The neighborhood itself is one of the most dangerous, challenging urban neighborhoods in the country, which is one of the reasons that our successes stands out, I think, as spectacular. I think it will work in any community. Next slide. One of the points I want to make is that the development of housing and the building of the community that lives in the housing are parallel lines. We're doing both at the same time, and that's a much longer discussion. But I want to make that clear that we're not building the housing and then coming in and creating the community. We're thinking about both as we're doing this. Next slide. So how do we fund an investment to create equity for residents? One of the ways that you can do that is in a multifamily housing project, there are often operating reserves built in the event of losses that might occur due to vacancies and turnover, and I guess those are the major things. And what we've done in our communities is not use those reserves for losses, and that has made them available to create a fund for renter equity. In addition, we do have more efficient operating. We have very high occupancy rates. Our communities' rates are about 96% over the past 10 years. And so there is a savings generated above what was planned for that project, and those savings can go into a fund for renter equity. We've also raised money for renter equity through grants from foundations. Next slide. This is just a little background on the resident profile. I want to go through quickly so I can get to the main points. So there's a legal agreement that we set up to establish renter equity, and those are the house rules, the resident association, and the renter equity agreement. It's actually a legal contract that's part of their lease. Next slide. So this is how we market it. We sent out a postcard. This is how we started. Once we got started, it's promoted by word of mouth, because we've never had enough housing to keep up with the demand, and we have a waiting list. Some people have waited for 3 years to be able to get into a unit with renter equity. Next slide. This is what we tell residents when they come to the orientation, that it's an opportunity to build assets and skills, participate in economic growth, and contribute to their community by sustaining its value. Next slide. Next slide. The premise is that residents will earn credits towards a future payment by helping keep the occupancy, income, safety, and appearance of their housing high, and that allows us to, I guess, reprogram funds from the project, from operating losses or from additional revenue generated or savings into the renter equity fund. And after 5 years, the residents can receive a cash payment. This is structured so they'll build up to $10,000 at a maximum in 10 years. Next slide. What do residents have to do to build credits? They have to pay rent on time. They have a work assignment, which is obviously something, not a major maintenance job, but an area of the property they're responsible for keeping clean and neat. They attend monthly meetings, and they need to abide by their lease and stay 5 years in order to become vested. Next slide. I've said these things that they can build up to $10,000 in 10 years. Here's the next slide is part of the contract, the renter equity agreement. So there's a credit sequence each month that they do pay their rent on time, come to the resident meeting, and do their work assignment. They earn X number of credits according to this schedule. If they miss a month because they don't come to a meeting, they just skip it and they earn the next credit in the sequence when they do all those 3 things. Next slide.
And pardon me, Marjorie, I'm going to actually ask you to go to your conclusion so we have time for other folks to present.
That's great. Okay. So in conclusion, we know that renter equity works by linking community building and affordable housing. We don't think it works to look at housing as a product or even asset building as a product that we're giving to the residents. We're trying to bring the residents into the process of taking care of their housing. And we are looking, I think for the next steps are to replicate this with other partners around the country or in our region. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Marjorie. And I'm going to now turn it over, as we look at these pictures of some of the units, to Michael Mira from the Tacoma Housing Authority.
Thank you, Jennifer. I'd like to explain why a public housing authority, if it's lively and alert, might be situated to promote asset building among the families who receive its housing or housing assistance. And I do this to urge you to regard your local public housing authority then as a partner in these efforts. I will close by recounting some examples of asset building efforts from the Tacoma Housing Authority. First, a housing authority offers 4 advantages for asset building efforts. And the first is that in most communities, housing authorities serve large numbers of families. And in most communities, except for the school district and the public assistance agency, your local public housing authority probably serves more poor families and poor children than any other organization in that community. Second, we know from asset building literature that poor families can indeed save, and that they can save despite spending half or more of their limited income on rent and utilities. Families who rent from public housing authorities or who receive its rental assistance have an advantage. They usually pay about 30% of their income on rent and utilities, and this should free up income for asset building purposes. The third advantage is that public housing authorities are already deep into these families' lives. They are the landlord. They are the managers of these very exquisitely detailed regulated housing assistance programs. They provide supportive services. In all these ways, the housing authority has influence over the choices and behavior of these families by the terms and conditions the housing authority offers this assistance. And this presents opportunities to exercise that influence in ways that promote asset building. The final advantage I'll mention is that housing authorities typically develop, own, and manage large residential properties. We think that's an advantage because of how we think of asset building and similar efforts. We think they are more likely to succeed when focused on a community that self-identifies in a positive way, and when the program is part of the visible walking landscape. And a housing authority, which has developed and manages that landscape, can arrange it to promote asset building. Before I close with some Tacoma Housing Authority examples, I'd like to mention what I think to be a necessary attribute that any organization needs to have to effectively manage an asset building program. The first it must have is an organizational mission to do it. This is probably essential for success in most any endeavor, but I think it to be especially so for asset building, because an asset building effort has an organization make a long-term commitment to its participating families. And for example, for match savings accounts for children, that could be an 18-year commitment. That requires an organizational stamina that's plausible only if asset building is part of a stable organization's mission and how it understands its work. I'll close with some examples of asset building efforts at the Tacoma Housing Authority. The first is something in Washington State called the College Bound Scholarship Enrollment Program. This is a very valuable promise the state legislature has made to every poor child in Washington State, that if you graduate from high school with at least a 2.0 grade point average, stay out of serious trouble, and get into a post-secondary program, four-year college, two-year college, technical school, certificate program, the state will make it financially possible for you to afford tuition. So this is a valuable promise, but over half the children in Washington State were missing out because of a catch. The catch is you have to sign up for it by the end of your 8th grade year. And but for that miserable bit of paper shuffling that over half the children were not getting to, they were losing out on this promise. So when we understood that at the Housing Authority, we thought, well, paper shuffling, that's what we do. Every year, we do paper shuffling with the families we assist. We fuss with them about their income, their family composition, their medical expenses, their utility expenses. We make them sign these blood oaths as part of the regulatory regime that governs their housing assistance. And all we did was added the College Bound Scholarship paper shuffle to the paper shuffle we already do with these families, and we now drive 100% enrollment rate every year for our 8th graders. That was a good example of how we think a housing authority is situated to be influential with asset building efforts like the College Bound Scholarship Program at relatively small cost. A second example at the Tacoma Housing Authority arises out of our recognition that signing these children up for the scholarship is not enough, that they still have to stay on track to graduate from high school and think of college or post-secondary programs beyond. And so we are launching something we call the Scholars Incentive Program in partnership with our school district that would devise a plan for each child with milestones that take them from 8th grade to graduation. And with each milestone, we will pay that child money in 2 pots. One pot will be a cash grant to the child, and another would go into an escrow account in that child's name. The escrow will grow as they meet each benchmark, and the student will collect the balance in the escrow once they finish the journey upon graduating from high school. The third example concerns home ownership. Housing authorities are real estate developers. Frequently they include home ownership programs and single-family homes for sale in their development. That's true of Tacoma. And we are building a community here we call Salishan that is a Hope 6 project that had us tear down 200 urban acres of old, worn-out public housing units. And we have rebuilt a brand new neighborhood of rental and home ownership. And by design, we have committed to setting aside 1/4 of the 350 homes for sale for low-income families to purchase at prices that would be affordable to them with a responsible mortgage. And in phase 1, we set up a variety of efforts to prepare families for this chance. We set up individual development accounts to help them save for the down payment. We turned our voucher program into one that could pay not only the rent but the mortgage. And we provided, with the help of partners, counseling to help families understand how to shop for a mortgage, how to shop for a house, how to own a house. And we moved 855 families out of Salishan to make way for its demolition and relocated them, and 100 of them moved directly into a home they purchased, 20 of them at Salishan, and their average income was about $26,000 a year. Now all that in phase 1 was before the big market crash. So when the foreclosure epidemic burned over Tacoma, we took a look back to see how these families were doing. And we found that the home purchasers did show their share of foreclosure. But interestingly, those who went through our home ownership counseling did not show a single foreclosure, which taught us the value of mentoring and counseling. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. So I'm going to now turn it over to Rob Weiner to talk about the mutual self-help model and IDAs.
Okay. Thank you, Jennifer. I'm going to be talking about the intersection between a niche program called the Mutual Self-Help Housing Program and asset savings through individual development accounts. So first, let me talk about the partnership. Next slide. So it is a partnership between our organization and Self-Help Enterprises. Our organization was formed in 1976 and is one of the oldest statewide associations of nonprofit community-based housing developers and advocates in the United States. We advocate on behalf of our members who are based in rural and urbanizing communities around California. Self-Help Enterprises was formed in 1965 and is the oldest and largest producer of mutual self-help housing in the United States. Next slide, please. So who should care about this particular strategy? For whom is it relevant? Well, first off, for organizations and individuals working in smaller towns and rural communities where there is a tradition of home building and mutual self-help. Secondly, any organizations working on affordable home ownership. And finally, mutual self-help housing organizations and Habitats for Humanity. We think it's kind of a no-brainer that even Homer Simpson could understand. Next, please. So what is mutual self-help housing? It's a method of creating affordable home ownership that first began in the San Joaquin Valley of California, one of the richest and poorest agricultural regions in the United States. The way it works is that under the supervision of a nonprofit organization, groups of 8 to 12 low-income families, usually in subdivisions of 40 or more units, are organized in phases to build their own homes. Typically, they work as a family unit, 10 to 12 months, 40 hours a week, at least 1,400 hours during the entire building process. One of the beauties of mutual self-help housing, its mutuality, is that each family helps to build the other family's homes as well, so that no one family can get far advanced in the building process unless all families are moving at the same pace. The families perform about 65% of the labor. The rest is contracted out. One of the main components of self-help housing is the sweat equity. That is the dollar value of their labor, which is monetized and serves as the down payment to secure, in rural areas, a U.S. Department of Agriculture Section 502 direct loan. This loan is amortized over 33 years, and the interest can be as low as 1%, depending upon the income of the family. Next, please. So we discovered, and actually it was rather dumb luck, that there is a good fit between the self-help housing process and the process of saving via individual development account. The way the program works is that our organization receives money from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Assets for Independence program. We pass those funds through to Self-Help Enterprises. They match the funds with their own non-federal funds and create a project reserve account. A participant, an individual, can save up to $1,000 total, typically contributing about $25 to $100 per month. The program matches on a 3-to-1 basis up to $3,000, with $1,500 coming from our monies via U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and $1,500 coming from Self-Help Enterprises, either their own funds or funds provided by local governments. Local governments who are partners are contributing money from their CDBG programs, redevelopment agency funds, and general funds. Next. So who's eligible? Well, in the case of this partnership with Self-Help Enterprises, it's residents who live within the 8-county area served by Self-Help Enterprises. They have to be first-time home buyers, be over 18 or over, have a valid Social Security number or tax ID number, have some kind of earned income, and they have to complete typically 6 to 8 hours of financial fitness education prior to opening up the account and qualifying to enroll in the program. Next. In terms of the income limits, generally the clients who can participate in this program are eligible for temporary assistance for needy families, eligible for the earned income tax credit, or have an income that is less than 2 times the federal poverty level. They also must not have net assets of more than $10,000, not including an automobile and a home. So we're talking about very low-income people who are going to become homeowners. Next. So a number of things that the families must do, the individuals must do once they qualify for the program. First, they have to complete home buyer education within 6 months of opening their account. They have to get together with a banker that is hosting the IDA account so they can learn more about the banking system and about the products and services offered by a bank. They have to make regular deposits within a 12-month period, missing no more than 3 deposits. And finally, they have to save for at least 6 months in order to be able to complete the savings goal and to graduate. Next. Now also, it's very important to meld the self-help housing process with the IDA savings process, so that the goal is to get families to enroll in the IDA program about 90 days into the self-help housing process in order to ensure that they have a long enough savings period to actually cash out the money at the end of the process and use it towards their home. Also, it's very important as individual groups of 8 to 12 families move through the building process that they also are all informed about the opportunity to save, so that there's no sense of unfairness and that we reinforce group solidarity. Also, family members who are saving are encouraged to enroll in a direct deposit system so that their contributions to the IDA program can be made automatically, because these are families that are working 3 to 50 hours a week, plus, on top of that, they're working 40 hours a week to build their home. So there's not a lot of discretionary time to make those deposits. And finally, in order to consolidate the learning that they get through building their own homes with the learning that they get by saving in a disciplined way, the trainings that they get on both issues happen at the same time so that they don't have to make separate trips. Next. Also, during the savings period, there's regular communication with a financial counselor. They get monthly reviews of their savings and quarterly statements that show not only their savings but their match. Again, the goal is for them to meet their savings goal within 6 to 10 months to coincide with the period during which the home will be built. Also, to use tax refunds as the building block to contribute towards the savings. And finally, the way that the money is typically used is for closing costs, because the closing costs in these self-help homes and in many Habitat homes are about $3,000 to $4,000. And so the amount that they save typically is enough to cover their closing costs. I'm going to skip the process here and move on because I don't want to cut short the question period. So the results is that we've seen about the average saving period is about 8 months. The average participant saves about $874. We match them on a 3-to-1 basis, so that's about $2,600. They end up with about $3,500 for closing costs, which covers their insurance and property tax impounds and other costs. Aggregate closing costs of $87,000. So far, we've had 25 homes that have closed, 10 that are in the pipeline now. and enormous strides that families make in terms of understanding and respecting how to budget and how to save. So the end product is that families get a home for life. They get the skills that they need to save, to prepare a household budget. They know how to fix up their homes and maintain them. And they have enormous pride of ownership, which comes through the struggle of having to build their own homes in a community and saving at the same time and meeting their savings goals. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rob. So great. Now we have some time for question and answers. And as a reminder, you can ask a question by typing it into the text box of the GoToWebinar control panel. So our first question is for Chris. One of our listeners asked, what is the funding stream you access for Beyond Housing's affordable rental units?
It's been a mix over the history of our development. We started in the early 1980s, with donated homes, a handful of charitable contributions, volunteer help, and then throughout the years we've used every kind of program that's come down the pike. For those of you who've been around for a while, the old rental rehab program, the modern rehab program, and then in the advent of the low-income housing tax credit program in the late 1980s, we've been utilizing that since it began. So we've done about 18 or 19 low-income housing tax credit projects, and most recently we used the NSP program that came out to buy and rehab single-family homes and to add them to our rental portfolio. What we've been able to do with the tax credit program is to front-load program dollars. So again, we work with a local equity partner that understands the value of the service provision that we try to provide for the families living in our homes. So we're able to, again, front-load some social service dollars. They're not forever dollars, but certainly they allow us for the first several years to have a nice stream of income so we can provide support to the families living in the homes.
Thank you, Chris. The next question is for Marjorie. What is the ideal size in terms of units for a renter equity program?
Well, I think that I can only talk about the projects we have done. We've done projects with 22, 25, and 12 units. It's worked well at that scale. The concept, I think, can apply at any scale as long as you can break down the meetings with the residents into groups that are small enough for people to feel that they have input. And I think that is a community of about 25 people or households who are meeting together on a regular basis. I think it's also important to design the housing so that people have a sense of community rather than being a part of something that is so large they don't relate to it. But I think it can be, I guess, built into the planning to break down a large community into smaller pods, or to take smaller communities and aggregate them, which is what we did, where we started with one community on a block and then built another community and other housing on the same block.
Thank you, Marjorie. A question from Michael. How are the grants to students and their escrow accounts funded?
We will fund that by redirecting some of our housing dollars for the purpose. We are also getting grants from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to pay for the administration of the program.
Thank you. And a question for Rob. What staff capacity is needed for the self-help model?
Well, that's a good question. We have all different kinds of self-help producers out there with different kinds of capability. But it's fairly labor-intensive. If you're lucky enough to be located in rural communities, you can qualify for a grant under the Section 523 program from USDA, which provides money for construction supervision. But you need, construction supervisors, certainly, to work closely with each group of families. You need financial advisors to work with the families in terms of their asset saving. That's usually a dedicated person. And you also need your homeownership counseling staff to help the families to understand the responsibilities of buying a home and owning it. So it's fairly labor intensive. It's not something necessarily that a small group can do with very limited staff. But it's conceivable that some habitats with small staff could manage a small-scale self-help project with an asset-building component.
Thank you, Rob. So this question is for all the panelists. Do you collect data, and have you been able to develop an evidence base for the effectiveness of these programs in terms of asset accumulation or avoided public costs? So maybe we can start with you, Chris. Do you collect data, and have you been able to develop an evidence base?
Well, Jennifer, was the tail end of the question to avoid public costs? Was that the tail end of the question?
That's correct.
All right. So clearly, from an asset building standpoint, we track all the data on accumulated savings, length of time savings, average deposits, how many folks are monthly depositors, how many are quarterly depositors, how many rely on the earned income tax credit. So we have all of that data. We have data on what they've used the asset to purchase. Again, we track a lot of data on the front side. The longitudinal data relative to home ownership stability and a few other things is the next step of our evaluatory scheme to make sure that we have all the front side data measurements about how someone went from point A, accumulated assets, purchased an asset, and now we're working on again a structure and a rigor to ensure that post purchase of the asset we have a better tracking mechanism to ensure we have longitudinal success by the families that went through our program.
Great, thank you, Chris. How about you, Marjorie? Are you tracking the impact of renter equity housing?
Well, actually, as a matter of fact, CFED is doing a third-party evaluation now that's being funded by the Ohio Housing Finance Agency. We do track, of course, the occupancy and the financial performance of the housing. And so we have a history of that, and we want to be able to demonstrate that renter equity is actually increasing those numbers. And at the same time, we issue statements to residents on a monthly basis of what their equity earned is, or their credits that they've earned. And we track participation in the meetings and the rent payments, whether they're on time or not. So yes, we do have 10 years of data on St. Anthony and the other two projects for a shorter period of time. And we are in the process of comparing that with data on a state and national level.
Great, thank you, Marjorie. And Michael, what type of data does Tacoma Housing Authority collect, and have you looked at any impact studies?
Yeah, we collect quite a bit of data, and on the examples I mentioned, we're probably most of our data comes in partnership with our school district. College-bound scholarship enrollees graduate from high school at a 90% clip compared to about a 63% clip for other children in our city. We also track how many of our 8th graders we succeed in signing up, and they're at about 100%. And some of our other educational initiatives have similar metrics wrapped around them, with data coming through the school district that tells us reading scores and other educational metrics.
Great, thank you, Michael. And then finally, Rob, I know you talked a bit about the results of your program. Is there anything you want to add in terms of impact or effectiveness?
Well, first off, on the self-help housing side of the equation, there's a lot of evidence-based research over the 45-year history of the program that shows that families which build their own homes stay in those homes many more years than the people who buy a contractor-built home, a conventional subdivision. Also, there's a lot of anecdotal evidence that people who build their own homes also develop a sense of empowerment and of competence that helps them to succeed in other endeavors, such as running for a water board district or a school board, getting a higher education, etc. In terms of the savings part of this, it's a new component that we've just added within the last 2 years. So we don't know for a fact there's a home buyer, a home builder who participates in a savings program. Do they have better banking habits, savings habits over 5 or 10 year period? We simply don't know that. What we do know is that every family that has gone through the savings program has bought a home, which you can't say for every participant in an IDA program, but every one of these families that saves ends up with a home, and a home that they can afford, and is a responsible homeowner. So right now the verdict is quite good that this is a wonderful marriage between self-help housing and asset saving.
Great, thank you, Rob. And then one more question, and this one is for Marjorie. If a family leaves prior to 5 years, do they leave without any equity benefit?
Yes. They are renting if they leave before 5 years. This is all laid out in an orientation that residents go through before they move in. There's the understanding that one of the ways that they're contributing to renter equity is by being long-term residents. We are generating the savings for renter equity by not having to cover the cost of vacancies and turnovers. But if they're there for a shorter period of time, they've enjoyed the benefits of a safer community and a community that's working together, but they have not made the contribution they need to make in order to build equity.
Great. Thank you very much, Marjorie. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up, but I want to thank all of the participants for joining today's webinar, and I want to particularly thank all the speakers for presenting today. And finally, thank you to NeighborWorks America for supporting this webinar. We will be posting the recording of the webinar on CFED's website, as well as on NeighborWorks America's site. And I'd also like to note that I know that we didn't have time for all the questions we received, but I will collect those questions and email them to the speakers, and hopefully they'll be able to follow up with you after this. So thank you all again for joining us today, and have a good weekend. Bye-bye.